Good evening and welcome to the Watchmen's Report. I'm Cody Higley, and tonight, as always, we're joined by Jason Foreman. And our special guest for this evening is Steven Michael Wolfe, who is running in the Republican primary, which is going to be held on May 5th. And the position that he's running for is state representative of the 86th district. So, Steven, welcome to the Watchmen's Report.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're certainly glad to have you here. We all like to get to know our candidates at the local level and the state level because, unfortunately, the reality is that most people haven't the slightest clue. I mean, they're going into election day typically very uninformed, and especially on that human side of things. And not knowing anything about the candidates. So
Yeah.
we hope that when this show is in the books, that people will have a better idea of who Steven Wolfe is. So let's have at it here, Steven. I know, and for folks out there, again, Steven's running for state rep for the 86th district. The 86th district covers all of Union County and also Prospect Township, Pleasant Township, and Marion Township, including the city of Marion in Marion County. And the position of state representative is a legislative position. So Ohio has two chambers. It has the House, and it also has the Senate. Very similar, or exactly the same as what the federal government has. So it's an important position, and this is a position that if you want to get something accomplished or you want to have representation in the state house for your local area, so if you're in that part of Marion County or Union County, then this is the position. So it is a very important position. You want to have somebody in there who is going to advocate for your district and what your district's needs are. So, Stephen is currently serving on Marysville City Council representing the first ward, and that's a position that he has been serving in since January of 2024. So, Stephen, a little bit of an introduction there. So, a Marysville boy, born, bred, and raised. So, tell us a little bit more about your early life. I know as I did some preliminary research, son of Michael and Andrea, and your father at one point was an accountant, and your
Mhm.
mother was a substitute teacher and special education aide. Was that for Marysville schools?
Yes, yeah. Yep.
Okay, so yeah, tell us about your early life. Just go, man. Just
Yeah.
go.
So you gave a good introduction there. Like you said, I'm born right here in Union County. Was born in 1999 here in Marysville, and my family has been in this area for quite a long time. I know my mother graduated from Marysville High School back in the 90s, and her and my father met at Urbana University back in the mid 90s, and then moved back to Marysville and had me. So I've lived here my whole life. I turned 27 back in February. So I'm getting a little older. I was talking to someone today, and they told me I was getting old, and I said, "Well, I'm only getting to 30, so let's slow down on that." But it's been an amazing experience. I have family all over the district, down in Plain City, up through into Marion as well. But growing up in this community, I've always loved living here. I know there's plenty of people that I went to high school with that have graduated and moved on to bigger and better things. They've gone to Cleveland or down to Miami or any place that they can get away to because they didn't like the feel of the community, and they said it was too small and there's nothing to do. Well, having grown up here, I've always had a passion for what goes on in our community and getting involved, and just being around, going to different events, going to Festa Fair that we have in Marysville in September, and different historical things. I'm a history nerd, minored in college in history, and had a just good kind of relationship growing up with the people that, make a community a community. And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of people forget is you can grow up, move somewhere, go live in a big city and not be around where you were, but that community you grew up in has a special place. It helps shape you and form you. And that was a big thing for me. Once I graduated from Marysville High School in 2017, I was able to, go play college football, which that was my goal going through the football process. It's a rough sport, as I'm sure you guys can imagine. A lot of grueling days and come home and look like you got beat up after practices or games. But it was one of those things that I knew I wanted to use. I had a passion for it. I loved playing it, but wanted to use that to get a good education, which allowed me to go to Davidson College down in North Carolina. I probably wouldn't have gone there had I not been able to play football. It's a school with a tuition of about $70,000 a year, and I said, yeah, that's not going to work if we don't get pretty good financial aid. So worked that out to only paying about $4,000 a year. Made a lot of good friendships, a lot of good experience. Just kind of being out, being somewhere different, and seeing, okay, is this for me? Does this make sense? And once I graduated from there, I knew I wanted to move back home. It's one of those things that I don't like the heat. I'm a cold weather boy, and the cold winters that we have here in Ohio, I'd much rather have that than the heat and humidity down south. But I moved back here in 2021 after school, and decided I wanted to figure out what I was doing. Took that summer to kind of look around, and eventually got a job as a caucus aide at the Ohio House of Representatives, working for different.
Wait, I'm going to interrupt you here, Steven, because
yeah,
we're running through this bio stuff. I know you're a young guy, so we got to stretch this out a little bit of extra time on each little part of it. You don't have that many years behind you like Jay and I do, but so you played offensive line and defensive line for Marysville, right?
Yeah, but towards the beginning, once I got to varsity, I said, I'm more of a defensive guy. I like to go around, tackle people, hit them and kind of do that thing. The offensive line doesn't get the credit that it deserves, but I was more of a defensive guy towards the end of high school. But yeah, I played down on the line. It was a very fun experience.
But here's a photo of you lifting the old dumbbells there in the weight room for Marysville, and then you, like you said, you got signed on to play for Davidson in North Carolina. Was that as defensive lineman as well?
Yeah. So in high school, I was a D end, and then once I got to college, mixed down into the interior, so a defensive tackle, defense nose guard, kind of playing there. And I'll tell you what, the Davidson College, so it's very small. It's about 2,000 students. I mean, if you watch basketball, know of Steph Curry. That's the claim to fame for most of Davidson. You bring that up, and people always start talking about it. But they have a football team too, and they play. It's a non-scholarship league. They play in the Pioneer Football League, which covers all over the country. But it's they play Dayton here in Ohio, Butler, Valparaiso, Drake, San Diego, down in Florida at Stetson, and at the time Jacksonville until they disband their team. But it was kind of an all over the country non-scholarship football league. It was Division I FCS, so just a little bit of a step below Ohio State. But it was a fun experience, kind of going all over, seeing different places. We got to fly out to San Diego, although that was during COVID, so it wasn't as nice as it could have been. Getting on the plane and landing, getting to the airport and to the hotel was about all we could do. But it was.
So what were your records in the weight room?
So I know in high school, I forget exactly what I was lifting then, but all totaled up, I made it into the 1,000-pound club that they had there. I was able to lift a lot. My specialty was probably the bench press. Once we got into college and I was lifting heavier weights and developing more there, I was able to bench. I believe it was 335 was my bench press. So that was my favorite. I was not a fan of the power clean. Never really did that in high school. So we weren't too keen on that, but over a 400-pound squat, deadlift in the 600s, I believe. So it was I can I couldn't do that today. I'll say that it was a much different time. I was in probably peak physical shape then, strong as ever, but definitely not to that level today.
Do you think you could outlift Ben Weber at this point?
I don't know. Maybe he's got a workout plan. I've been,
Oh, come on,
running.
man. No, you gotta stand behind your credentials. You gotta say, man, I'd make him look bad. I'd destroy him in the weight room.
I haven't been lifting as much. I get out there and like to, get a lot of cardio, obviously running around the district, going all over the place now. But I'm definitely not where I used to be. I'll say that.
Hey, that's how we all are, man. You just get to a point in life where it's just downhill, and I know I'm at that point in life, but
I know I started to get to the point where I'll wake up in the morning, my back's a little sore, and so what did I do? I was just out mowing the yard yesterday or picking something up, bending over too much, maybe. I don't know.
right, it's crazy. It's crazy how that works. But so you minored in history at
Yeah.
Davidson. Did you major in like poli sci then or something like that?
Yeah, majored in political science, minored in history. It was those two go well together, and they've always been an interest of mine. So it was pretty straightforward once I got in there. That's what I wanted to do.
Okay, so did you get involved in like college Republicans? What were your, I guess, conservative credentials or political involvement in your earlier educational career, high
Yeah,
school, and then when you got to Davidson?
yeah. So I'll start out very young. I was probably I've been 5 years old in 2004. So living here in Marysville, it's a 30-ish, 35-minute drive to Columbus. And that was the presidential election that year. I convinced my parents to take us down to go see George Bush's reelection campaign and, go down there and get in line for that. So I knew from an early age that I was interested in politics and wanted to, kind of watch that stuff very closely and get involved. So, fast forward to high school. I was involved with our civics club at Marysville High School. Not too many members. It was a smaller group, but we had a couple meetings there. Nothing too crazy. Then we tried to start up a Republican club. It was very, very short-lived. But then once I got into college, football took up quite a bit of my time. Every day but Mondays, we had something going on, football practice and lift and film and meetings and all that kind of thing. And then there was also Davidson's a very very academic school, I guess is the best way to put it. That's the focus for most everyone there, and athletes going in know that as well. So I wasn't able to get involved with there was a campus Republicans club, but I wasn't able to get involved with that because it kind of got, in my football schedule and class schedule kind of took over, and I couldn't do most of that stuff because it's a full-time commitment doing that. But it was good to, there were different events they would host depending on the day, if we didn't have practice or it was late enough in the evening that I could get to. Going to see different speakers. I believe it was Andrew Pudzer from President Trump's first term. He came in to speak at the school, so I was able to go see him speak. And there were a couple other political people that wanted to come in and came around. So I was able to do that, but because of football and class, that took up a lot of the time there, and with travel and whatnot. So not as much as back in high school, but graduating from there and moving back, I got more involved with our county party here in Union County. Attending our First Friday events and the Union County Republican Farm Fest that they'll have in August. Attending that, helping out, volunteering for different events like that. But then also, this would have been 23, I want to say, early 20, kind of that summer of 2023, getting involved and going door to door for the two different political campaigns that were issues. The one in August, which is the Constitutional Ballot Initiative, that August of 23 or 22, 23, and then later that same year, the going out with the party against the abortion amendment that was on the November election for that year as well.
So when you graduated Davidson with a bachelor's in poli-sci and a minor in history.
Mhm.
You come back to Ohio, and where do you start working? And
Yeah.
then how do you go from that to getting involved in the local politics? Was there some connection there? Or did you just show up to a meeting because you said, "Hey, I'm a poli sci major," and or did you do like an internship or an externship at Davidson? I know you worked under Tom Young's,
Mhm.
State Representative Tom Young's, but tell us about that, how
Yeah.
that played out.
So, while I was home for the summers, while I was in school, I interned a couple different places. I started out with a group of painters that were in Marysville. Interned with them for a couple summers before freshman year and afterwards. But then the summer of my sophomore year, I interned with the Ohio Republican Party, just kind of seeing, what goes on, what all goes on within the party there, kind of getting that experience. It was in downtown Columbus, so I believe it was 3 days a week, 8 to 5, 8 to 4, kind of working on different mailing lists and different events that they had setting up. So getting involved with that, and then the summer of after my junior year of college, I interned with Congressman Jim Jordan. So that would have been the summer of 2020. So it wasn't as I guess full as it could have been because of COVID. I was only able to go up on Mondays to intern with him in his office in Lima. But doing that, working at Honda at the same time the rest of the week, having those the conversations. But it sparked my interest, in local government and getting involved in the state and kind of seeing what goes on here. Because as you mentioned earlier, there's so many people that don't get involved, that don't kind of look into local elections or state elections, and a lot of attention gets focused on DC and the presidency and Congress, and all that stuff's obviously very important. But I've always said that the decisions that get made in Columbus and the decisions that get made in council and village chambers and township trustee meetings have typically more immediate and faster impact on people's lives than something in DC. So once I got back here from college, I actually, funny enough, I door dashed for a couple months while I was going through the interview process and kind of figuring out where I was applying to. And I do not envy the people that do that. And it's not always the most fun. And there's some interesting characters you come in contact with doing that. But I applied for a couple different positions. One was at with the LSC Fellowship Program for the Ohio Legislature. And kind of paired up with that, I also applied for, it would have been Kevin Miller, his legislative aid position, because he had just been added there to the state legislature after Larry Householder had been removed. So kind of going through that interview process and meeting with him and leaving my resume and having those conversations with people in that sphere let me get, I believe it was a couple weeks later, they reached out and said, "Hey, we have the opportunity if you want to be a caucus aide. It's the same type of role as a legislative aide is, but you work for a couple different members at the same time, and it's kind of on like the term used was a relief pitcher. It's like you come in when you're needed in different offices and kind of help out." So that's where it started on my professional side. But once I got back here, just attending those meetings and going to see different speakers that were coming up for the First Friday events, and getting involved in meeting with different members of the party, and just forming relationships and talking to people that I've seen around town and heard of, and seen on different meetings or on social media, but finally having those conversations and relationships with them just let me get involved with that. And it wasn't something that, hey, because I have a political science degree, I thought I should go do it. It's just something I was always interested in, and I've always viewed myself as a Republican, and a lot of that comes from my upbringing and my faith, and my parents, and having good conversations with them about different things, and leading me in that direction. And once I was able to kind of go through high school and college, I knew I stood firm in what I'd been raised in, and thought it was really the only thing that made much sense compared to a lot of other political philosophies. And spending time at Davidson College, which is a very liberal institution, and I'm grateful for my time there and the friendships made. But there are a lot of people, and myself included, that were out of place I guess is the best way to put it, compared to, the administration and professors and other student groups and,
That's
conversations.
just college, man. That's
Yeah,
everywhere. It's 98% of all colleges. Unless you're going to Hillsdale or Liberty or a place like that,
yeah,
then you're screwed if you're a conservative.
yeah. And I will say there, you know, it's probably 75 to 80% liberal between all the student body and the professors and whatnot. But a majority of the conservative, students on campus are either members of a sporting team. So, obviously with football having quite a few members, there were a lot of conservative football players there. So you have those relationships. My roommates, I keep in contact with my one roommate that I lived with for 3 years, and we agree on pretty much everything. And those are all very helpful, obviously, to have that kind of place to fall back on. But even going to our different groups, we would have a fellowship of Christian athletes. A couple of our coaches participated in that and helped out, and we're able to have good conversations and kind of be not as secluded off from the rest of campus, but have those conversations. So once I got back here, it was nice to be back in an area that I share a lot of agreement with on most things politically. And once you get down to, and I believe I said this at the candidate forum, what was that, last week, the week before, that most of the people in Columbus, in the legislature, the legislative aides there, college students just out of college, you have a lot of similarities with them and a lot of shared experiences that help form those relationships and have good conversations. And when the summer is typically the dead time there in Columbus, obviously the legislators are back in the districts, or they're out campaigning, or they're doing whatever they do. And so you have a lot of downtime to have good conversations and kind of figure out different things and kind of talk about different policy issues. And a lot of good questions come up. So it's one of those things where I was, once I got into the caucus aide role, meeting new people, kind of just having deeper conversations on politics that you don't really have in regular life. And a lot of people talk about, at your work, you don't want to talk about politics or religion. And I think there at the State House that those two come together quite a bit. You have a lot of conversations on both of those. So it was a very, I would say, entertaining and also helpful start to kind of my professional career, and learning the ins and outs of state government and having a good background and understanding, because so many people don't they don't know what goes into the process of passing legislation, or how the budget works, or who you reach out to on different issues, and what those conversations have to be like, because there's obviously certain levels that you want to step on toes, and there's a lot of separation there. There's people that reach out about issues that state government can't help with, local kind of zoning issues. You got to refer them back down to your local officials in the city or township, or issues with county, and having those conversations. But also, we had plenty of people reach out about they need their passport updated for a trip they're going on in 2 weeks, and that's not something you can do at the state house. You got to send them up to at that point it was Mike Turner, who's the congressman for that area, and hey, we're going to send you on to Mike Turner or one of the two senators. And I'm just kind of learning what exactly goes on in Columbus that a lot of people don't understand. That got me thinking more just about what goes on in government and how little people tend to know about what goes on in government. And like I said, I've always paid attention to what goes on here in Marysville. I've paid attention to the different zoning board meetings, or the design review, planning commission, city council meetings before I was even back here from college. I was going through and reading the minutes for that, and asking questions to different people, or saying, hey, this was going on or that was going on, and kind of researching the different people that are running, because I would have been 19 or 20 during the first kind of city council election in 2019. So that was my first chance to really get involved with, hey, this is what's going on in local government, and here are the people running, and here's what's happening. And the same happened in 2021 when I was a senior and moving back here. But between those kind of conversations I'd had before, and the kind of interest I've always had. And working in Columbus, it kind of led me to looking at getting involved in local government, and kind of having those conversations with people around me.
So how competitive is it to get one of these aid positions or something with one of these state reps or
Yeah.
senators? Is it super competitive, or what does the process look like? Because it doesn't seem to me that you were born with a silver spoon,
No, no.
unlike one of your competitors in the race. Um, so what does that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is the person to person interaction. You know, I didn't obviously end up getting that legislative aid position with Kevin Miller, and a lot of that has to do with the relationship between the member and their legislative aid, and having that face to face interaction and answering questions, and looking obviously through resumes and kind of different writing samples that they ask for, and so a lot of it depends on member to member because every member's very different. The different personalities, different thoughts, different ways they want to attack kind of policy priorities, or different ways that they view themselves as a member and what they think that their job should be or what their role should be. So it really depends on what your interaction is with that person you interview with. So a lot of people start out as the page program at the state house. They'll kind of go through and you're working in a bigger, it's a larger office, different pages. There's a handful of pages at any time working there, and they'll go do and they're not small tasks, but go out and help out different offices with different projects, or help out around during session time. And they're the ones that are going up and back and forth and giving stuff to members on the session on the floor, and doing that process. And so they're in college at that time. But then you move up, you have others that are in college that then become constituent aides, or sometimes caucus aides after they graduate. But the constituent aides usually get paired up with an office, and they have those conversations with the legislative aide. And, at least in my case, my member, trusted my judgment on who we had come work for us, and, who we interviewed, and relied on me to make those decisions. So you have the caucus aide position. So there's those two kind of while you're in school that people will use to gain experience, gain knowledge. But then once you graduate, there's the LSC fellowship that I had mentioned that I didn't get into. But then there's also the caucus aide position, which I started as. So it like I said, depends on what your interview goes like with the member. Do you have a good conversation with them? Do you think you probably won't get along? Does the member think you probably won't get along? Whatever it might be, leads to, hey, I'm going to go with this person or that person. Usually it's, they'll give a handful of resumes to the member, and say, hey, here are the 4 or 5 people that, we have kind of either internal or a couple on the outside that are wanting to come in. So, going through that process and working there, I started in November of 2021 as it would have been mid-October, November, as the legislative aide for Tom Young. We had a conversation, and we hit it off really well. We had talked about football and just working and being involved in government and that kind of thing. So we had a good interview, good conversation, and we started. Would have been that month working on new legislation. So it really just depends. Some offices, they like to take their time, and there's a lot of turnover at the legislature because it's not a forever job for everyone. There's some people that are there for years and they do a great job, and they've been there and they're happy where they're at and making good money. But a lot of people move on to different places. So there's a lot of turnover, and it just depends on the office. Some members have more aides than others. Some members are obviously very hard to work for and very demanding of their staff. Others are very laid back and view their role as a legislator as they're not there to just introduce legislation and draft legislation, and they want to make sure they're working on specific pieces. Or I've always heard, and it's a saying I think that it's been brought up from time to time. I don't disagree with it. There's a lot worse things that a politician can do than nothing. They can pass a lot of bad legislation or introduce a lot of bad legislation. So Um, the jobs themselves, it really just depends. Some can be very competitive depending on the member. Others can be, hey, we need you to work for this person. You're able to take your time and do this, and sometimes that works out great. Other times, they're moving on to a new person in a couple months, and it's a hard job at times, but it's a very fulfilling job.
So why do certain members have larger staffs than others? Or is it everybody that's not like the speaker
Mm-hmm.
or the minority leader, they get the same number? Because you would think that everybody should be equal in all 99 for the most part, because they're all representing approximately the same population.
Yeah, so I think ideally, and having conversations with people there, ideally everyone has the same amount of staff, but there's not always enough people that reach out to fill kind of those other roles. Obviously, filling the legislative aid position is the priority for offices, because that's the person there day to day, answering questions, answering the phones, emails, working on legislation, helping with committees, and kind of doing that whole process. So every member gets a legislative aid. So they start with that, and then it depends. Some people have interns that they bring in from their own district. We had different interns from our district come on. Some offices don't do interns. It just depends. There's obviously, with Ohio State being right there in Columbus, you'll get different people applying for internships. So you'll have that. And you just have to ask, hey, is there any interns available or resumes available for interns? But then you get the caucus aide position. Chairman of committees, chairman, chairwoman, they get their, if there's enough, and they're the priority for getting caucus aides or constituent aides, sorry. That, if you're a chairman like my boss was, so we had a constituent aide that would help out, take some of that focus on the constituent interaction from time to time while I'm helping with committee or running committee, to have someone there to answer the phones, or while I'm working with him on decision making and what we're going to be doing the next week in committee, or what all that looks like. So that's where you get the members that have a couple, another staffer, and then obviously the speaker, minority leader, they have a larger staff, and they work a lot more closely with the policy and legal staff and finance and all that. So it depends. Some members, they're fine with just having a legislative aide, and that's the person, their point person, and they have a good relationship with them, and we'll talk to them, and they trust them. Other times, you get newer staff that comes in, and it takes time to kind of get a feel for an office and what happens, what your member likes, how they like to respond to things, how they, what do you do with the mail, how do you interact with constituents, you directly point them to the member, or do they trust you enough to be able to answer different questions based on your time with that member. So it just depends. Some like smaller staffs, others they'll get try and get as many people to help out as they can, but it just depends member to member.
So between Miller and Young, um, you worked at the State House from when to when?
So I started August of 2021, and I worked for those 4 different members at that time. I got put in Jamie Callender's office for a couple weeks just to work under his legislative aide who'd been there for a while, kind of getting that experience. And then, working with, it was Bill Seitz, Diane Grindell, and Brett Hillier as a caucus aide, because they had transitions in their staff. So they said, hey, can you fill in for, a little while as we're doing this to, help smooth over that transition. And then, like I said, I started with Rep Young in October, November of 21. And then I was with him until this past September of 2025 when I resigned.
Oh, so you just recently left?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, it was in order to run for this office, I had to not be working there at the State House.
Okay. Now, you are also on Marysville City Council, so let's kind of transition into that discussion here. But before I do that, I do want to ask you. They always say you don't want to see how the sausage is made You just want to take the butcher's word for it. So, were you shocked or appalled by anything that you saw in the state house that you can discuss? Because there's a lot of just bullshit
Mhm.
that goes on in these parties. So, is that something that you saw while you were there, just even just as a spectator?
So I think Tommy Boy has a very similar quote to what you just made there, but um, I wouldn't say appalled. Not, I mean, it's some of the stuff that you think happens. Probably it does happen. The kind of conversations that happen and backroom workings, and the relationships that people have. Disappointed is probably a better word. Just seeing how with different when different people make different decisions, and the infighting that kind of happens in that regard, it is disappointing to see happen. And like I had mentioned earlier, or before, the election of Jason Stevens as speaker kind of led to a less productive, but also just worse work environment between for staff, but also for getting good legislation passed. I know we had worked on legislation that was it was anti ESG legislation, and we couldn't end up getting it passed or really moved because different relationships that obviously my boss had with different members, and conversations that come up from that, and people, they have vendettas, and they have a long memory, and can hold grudges, and stuff like that happens, and it's disappointing, and it makes things harder when you're trying to make sure you're passing legislation that is, one, beneficial to your district, but also for just the people of Ohio, and passing good conservative bills.
We had a pretty good conversation with candidate for treasurer of the state of Ohio, Jay Edwards,
Mm-hmm.
kind of on his insight into the reality of politics
Yeah.
in the state of Ohio. So, if you want to check out that interview, folks, be sure to check out MarionWatch.com, go to Rumble, go to YouTube, or go check it out on Facebook, because it's enlightening, and it's something that people, I think, have. They know that it goes on. You hear about those backroom dealings and all this corruption and crookedness
Yeah.
that's pretty much pervasive in politics. Um, but when you get the insight from people that have actually experienced it firsthand, I think that it just adds that much more to the story. So,
Yeah.
all right. So we've got that experience now. How did you come to run? Now, you ran as a write-in candidate, and you
Correct.
challenged. Was his name Joe Christian? Was that
Aaron Carpenter.
Carpenter? Carpenter. Um, how did that come to be? Where you challenged him? Now, I didn't delve too deeply into that conversation. Now, Jay, if you want to pull up that article about that race, because it was really, really close. It was like what, 9 votes or
Yep.
something.
9 votes.
But
It was
Carpenter was fairly outspoken, and
Yeah.
I think what he made comments in favor of January 6th. Or tell us about that race, how you just how that came to be that you decided to challenge him. First of all, was he not conservative? Was there some other motivation for you? So you challenge him as a write-in, and then you beat him by 9 votes.
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is something I've always said, while I was running for that seat. And I've never held anything against Aaron. He's a conservative. He's a Republican. I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. And, it didn't really have to do with that. More so of there were just people in our ward that were disappointed with the lack of involvement or ability to reach out and have conversations, and ask questions about legislation, and where someone stood on different things, and getting answers, and kind of trying to get in contact to get help on different issues that affect you in city government. So I took time as I'm sitting there, and back in Marysville. This was 2023, so thought a lot about it. had looked at it, and once we got to the filing period, no one had filed to run against him, so it was just Aaron running. And obviously, it would have been a lot easier to be on the ballot to do those things, to run for office. But I had ended up, after prayer and kind of having conversations, said, you know what, I'll run for this. I'll see that this is my home. I've lived here my whole life. I want to make sure that the person on city council that these people have to reach out to in the first ward is someone that they can have a conversation with, is someone that they can get in contact with if they have a question or a concern, and make their voice heard, and act, represent them. And a lot of the concern in town, and if you look into Marysville over the last probably 15-20 years, it is just the way that growth had occurred, and the speed that it happened at. And a lot of it, there are apartments and a lot of large housing developments, and making sure that we're going through and being thoughtful and actively engaging our citizens on what needs to happen, what shouldn't happen, and updating our infrastructure and making sure that's all in place before we continue to grow the way that we are. So having thought about all that, and listening to different people, and kind of feeling that there's people that would like to see different leadership. And if you go back and look at that election as a whole, there were three of our 7 council members were brand new after that election. And then one who had so that year the 4 wards were up for election. 3 of the 4 members were brand new after that election. Donald Berger was the only one who was reelected from his ward. So kind of running.
Did it switch parties?
No,
Is that what happened?
No, it's all Republican. Everyone that had been on city council at that time was Republican. So it was more or less a kind of referendum on the development and growth within the city of Marysville, and how that looked and how that needed to proceed or not proceed. And I've had a lot of conversations with residents that were concerned at how fast we were growing. I'll use the example of, I went to college after I graduated in 2017, and then I'd come home over the summers when I'm working and interning in the area, and then once I finally graduated and I was back here full time, just seeing the rapid amount of growth in a short period of time, and not having the necessary infrastructure in place. And obviously Marysville's not the small town that it used to be. Town of 15,000 people when I was born, to now it's just about 30, if not about to be over 30,000 residents. So that was a lot of the focus, was smart growth, I guess is the best way to put it. But it didn't switch parties or anything. It's still, from my understanding, I don't go through and check every single member's voting record on every single thing, but the 7 of us that are on council are conservative Republicans, and share those beliefs. But obviously different degrees, different legislation, someone might vote for it or vote against it, and having those conversations leads to different ways to kind of there's more than one way to skin a cat, they say. So kind of looking at it like that. But that was a big focus. So it came down to the 9 vote difference there. Obviously, if
Carpenter was just not responsive to his constituents in the first ward, and you decided to challenge him, or was it a specific objection that you had to votes that he had taken while he was on council?
It was a little mix of both. There were a lot of, like you'd mentioned, not as responsive to different things. I was speaking with one gentleman who, as I'm campaigning, he said, "Hey, I've been trying to get help to get in contact, and I haven't been able to reach him. I don't know what's going on here. I need help with this issue at my house." And I said, "Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not on council now, but I'm more than happy to reach out to somebody, see if you can get something done." And so I reached out to the necessary party, and within I think a couple days, you got the issue fixed. And it's stuff like that. Not being able to ask a question or understand what someone's thought process is on things. But there was also just the votes on different developments, and for or against, or not making people aware of different things happening within the district, or the ward. And like I said, a lot of, I'm a lifelong resident of Marysville, and I'm not against growth, but I think doing it, and there's a right way to do it. Um, I've used the example now that I've been on council and had the opportunity to go through a lot of different developments of projects and votes on things. But someone you go to a restaurant, very nice restaurant, someone brings you out a steak, you get it, great steak, looks great, tastes great, you eat it, awesome, feel full afterwards, right? Well, in this example, they bring out another two steaks, and then after a couple minutes they bring out another one, and they say, well, you got to make a decision on this right now. Do you want to eat it? Do you not want to eat it? And so it's like, hey, let's let this digest. Let's have a conversation on, hey, is there anything we need to do differently? Do we need to update infrastructure in this part of town, or what changes do we have to have? Because obviously, as more people move in here, there's a lot more strain on our safety services, police and fire, and the courts. And we're cities are focused on income tax, so making sure that we're focused on that and making the best decisions that we can. Not stopping growth and not growing at all, but let's let it kind of slow down, take a breath, figure out what needs to change, what we might need to do differently. And I think we've started to do that on council. We recently passed a visioning plan that looks at where Marysville's at now, what could happen in the future, what different decision, if this area of town, and my focus has really been on redevelopment of existing areas of our community that have, either fallen apart or, have just been kind of left in disarray, and, don't always, the area doesn't feel the best, doesn't look the best, could use fixing. And that's my focus is, hey, let's focus on the inside first, and then start looking at, okay, here where there's a new development that wants to come in and annex in or do whatever. So that's kind of the way I've handled myself throughout council. And I've been a no vote on a lot of different developments because, I didn't think it was the right time. And, the residents of my ward said, we want to slow things down. And, that hadn't been happening in the past. And that's part of the reason why I got in and ran like I did.
So are you in a newer part of the city, like a growing part? Is your first ward, or is it kind of the older established part of
so
the city?
the first ward is north of 33, and then it's in between Mill Creek and Route 4. So it's like the northern portion of Marysville, and Mill Valley. If you ever drive down 31 and come into town, it's that housing development that you hit as you get right into Marysville. So that area had been developed over the last what's now probably 35 years, and it's its own little community. Honestly, there's about 7,000 people, give or take a couple hundred in the area, but with different decisions that have been made, there's going to be another housing development right across 31, and there's a whole area as you go down towards US 33 that is still in conversations for different types of development between commercial, retail, all that kind of stuff. So it's not the newest area. There's newer homes, built within the last probably 10 years, but there's a lot newer parts of town that you're seeing a lot more kind of cookie cutter homes in a lot of those places. And Mill Valley's not much different than that. I mean, you have a lot of, and that's an issue I've had and residents have brought to my attention, is a lot of the developments that come forward, a lot of the growth that happens is that cookie cutter, run of the mill. Most houses look the same kind of lot, same kind of design, colors. There's no character. So that plays a part in it. But yeah, it's the newer part of Marysville. Yeah, so
Okay.
if you have that Ward 1, everything north of 33 and east of or west of Route 4, I'd say the Ward 4, which is kind of the uptown middle portion of town, and then Ward 3, you have some older homes, same in Ward 2, but there's larger developments, more growth, as you get into Ward 2 and kind of the green pastures area of Ward 3 once that got built, and they're still building some homes out that way.
Okay, so you squeak by in victory with a write-in challenge to Mr. Carpenter for Marysville City Council. You take office January of 2024. So you've been in there a little over 2 years.
Yeah.
What have been your top three accomplishments that you would, if you were to say, hey, I sponsored this ordinance or I made this critical motion and did XYZ, what would you identify as your top three accomplishments? And then what have been your top three failures or regrets
Mhm.
as a member of Marysville City Council?
Yeah. So I would say accomplishment wise, first one is honestly, you think it's a common sense kind of thing that should be happening and it should happen, but um, just interacting with the residents of the ward, being available to answer questions and, reach out. And, I found over the 2 years I've been now on council, over 2 years, that even offering some of that, there people don't get involved as much. They don't ask questions. I mean, I've held numerous kind of office hours, is what I call them. In our ward, there's a restaurant in the front that front as you enter in, and I'll sit down there and you say, hey, I'm having an office hours, or hey, if you need to call me, call me. More than happy to talk. Let's set this up. But very few people took me up on that offer. But that's probably the biggest one, is just making myself available, willing to talk to people, and hey, here's my number. Feel free to give me a call. If you ask me a question over email, yeah, we can set something up and get together and talk. Or hey, we're having office hours, here, and come in. Very few people did, but I'd say the second one is honestly working to be a voice against just the rapid growth that's happened in town. Making sure we're being critical of things and not just accepting a development because someone's bringing it to us and saying, hey, you need to do this. This is a great job. And, like I said, there's good things. I use steak as a comparison. There's good things about it, but let's be smart. And so that was kind of the second biggest thing, is I've been one of the few voices and the majority of the no votes that have occurred on council on different developments, and making sure that the people that elected me, I told them this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to do, advocating for those kind of things. And I've held to that, and I voted that way. But then I'd say the third one is being a critical voice to the rapid growth of data centers in our area. Southern Union County, Jerome, and now we're coming into Marysville, has seen a boom in data center development. And as the water provider for central Southern Union County and city of Marysville, Jerome Township, that's a big impact for us in our community. And making sure that it's not just a 7 yes vote on that development, but being a voice of, hey, there's a lot of people that have concerns, and I'm not one to say data centers are the devil, but there's a lot of concerns with them and what happens. And I'm not naive to it's not a brand new kind of technology and product, but there's still a lot that has to happen with that and kind of a better understanding. And we see it now at the state level that they have a 6-month kind of study committee set up to go over data centers and what's going on, and we want to have all the facts.
Do you really think that that's going to be productive, though, Stephen? Come on now. I mean, if you look at the special interests that buy off all these politicians in the state of Ohio, and you look at Vivek Ramaswamy wanting to turn it into Ohio into the Midwest Silicon Valley. There's definitely a concerted effort here. So, as encouraging that may be, to have members of the state house say, "Oh, we're going to have this commission that's going to investigate." Honestly, I don't trust them. I honestly don't trust them.
That's fair.
And they're not deserving of our trust, because they'll just say, oh, well, we looked into it and this egghead that we bought off, or that big tech bought off, said that this is all fine and dandy. I mean, when you have
I would agree with that, it's
non-disclosure agreements that are being utilized with all these proposed deals, and you have the EPA pending permit to allow them for social welfare or economic considerations. Yeah, you guys go ahead. You can pollute all you want. there's and people are pissed about it.
Yeah,
That's the thing.
rightfully so.
Real life grassroots conservatives are
Mhm.
looking at these scumbags that are being bought and paid for, and you can look up campaign contributions all you want on the Secretary of State's website. This is a bunch of crap. Does it make
Yeah,
you mad? I mean, it makes me mad. I know it makes Jay mad, and I know it makes the audience here on the Watchmen's Report super mad.
yeah, I get frustrated when I see that, and when I bring up that committee, it's not necessarily saying it's going to solve or be the answer or come up with really answers that we want to hear or need to hear, but it's there's at least something going on that they're not just lockstep saying data centers are all fine. There's some people there that are willing to say, hey, there's a concern at the state level, and more so my focus on this has been there's a concern here in Southern Union County on the rapid growth. Me and our councilwoman Julie Kramer, and she didn't run for reelection this time around because she has children in high school and is ready to do other things, and she filled in as a council member, had stepped down, so she was appointed to our council. But me and her, there's different things that we agree and disagree on. But one of the things we agreed on was, there's a lot more focus that needs to be paid attention to these data center developments and the water usage, and having conversations with residents that live within the area these data centers are going to be in. And a lot of them, they're outside the corporation limits of Marysville. They're in the township surrounding us. They have those concerns about what the effect's going to be on the well water, and there's concerns about the aquifer, and how much water we're supplying, and in the surrounding area, the negative health effects that living right next door to a data center might have. So me and her kind of were two of the voices against a lot of the rapid data center development, and concerns with what it's going to do to Marysville in the future. So it's frustrating to see that there's a lot of pushback on that, and I think if it's like I said, it's not brand new, but it's a much newer technology than other things.
At this
Yeah,
scale,
exactly.
it's 2 years old. This just popped up. It
Mm-hmm.
was like this elite cabal got together and said, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put data centers like everywhere in the state of Ohio and around this country.
Yeah, and I
Like,
think the
and
big thing here
they
is
want to
that
say, oh, you like your AI and you like your technology. There's something else going on here. I'm sorry. I might have to take my tinfoil hat off here, but when you have all these tech bros and everything that are like coming together, and you have this whole surveillance state that is already in place, but with a lot of these groups and stuff, they're pretty outspoken. They're pretty outspoken about their intentions, Agenda 2030 and all this other shit. And I don't know, people need to be very, very concerned
yep,
about where this state in particular is headed. Because the thing that really frustrates me, Stephen, is the fact that, up here in Marion County, Mora County, even you guys in Union County, I mean, we went all in for Trump. We're all, as red can be,
mm-hmm.
good conservative voters, traditional values, which, we walk the walk. And then you get these bought and paid for politicians that just stab us in the back. And that's
Yeah,
why we never accomplish anything as a political movement or an ideology. I mean, you want to talk poli sci, like you tell me something that conservatism has conserved in the past 100 years, and I can probably count it on one or two fingers. So that's just the reality of the
yeah,
situation. And then people are pissed. So
yep.
I don't know. And
Rightfully so, they are. Yeah, it's a frustrating thing to see. Different groups or companies or whoever comes forward, and they're willing to put enough zeros behind a dollar sign and say, hey, here's what we're willing to pay, we're willing to do this. And you know like you said, they come in, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future with them. I look at it as I've grown up with I have an iPhone, fits in my pocket. My parents grew up and a bunch larger phones, and I remember them talking about you finally get a phone in the car and you have all this. And that technology is shifting and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And, you have people with watches that are basically their phones now. And, I look at data centers in a similar way. You have these gigantic buildings. They're using tons of electricity, tons of water. Who knows if in 10 or 15 years that a data center won't fit in the size of a house and, only need that much water to figure all that stuff out. But we're committing ourselves long-term to a lot of the challenges. And then, they want this amount of water. Is this the best thing for our community? Is this the best long-term thing for the citizens of, Union County, Marysville, wherever it is? And I've advocated time and time again that rather than it kind of being a piecemeal approach throughout the county, but working together with, City of Marysville, Jerome Township, different townships in Mill Creek Township, whatever, the Union County as a whole, what's the limit here? Because we can't just keep bringing them in. I'm still going to be a no vote on them.
At the corner of every street, I want a data center.
But
I want to be able to throw a stone in any direction and hit a data center.
Yeah, it's there are people that are concerned. Ohio is in a weird spot for two reasons. One, you have the state sales tax on the construction of data centers, which I would hopefully like to see that done away with. I know that was attempted to in the last budget, but the governor had vetoed that portion. So I think getting rid of that, but also Ohio is in a different spot, I guess. I don't know what the right word is with the weather. There's not droughts like you have out west. There's more tornadoes now than there had been, but you're not at risk of all the tornadoes that you have in kind of the Great Plains and the hurricanes out on the coast. And, there's a lot of water around here, which is what attracts them. But I look at,
until they use it all up.
Yeah, exactly. And I look at in Northern Virginia, which is not a state that I typically, think about very often when looking at politics or what we want to take like an idea from, but they have a ton of data centers in Northern Virginia. And those data centers, they're begging them to let them be there. In Northern Virginia, the people there, they say, hey, pay us what we want and you're allowed to come here. It's not we're giving breaks or, hey, here's a tax abatement or here's this or here's that to bring you in here. You got to pay your fair share. And obviously they're there because they have access to the river and, all the water that comes through there on the Potomac and in that region of the country. But that's why Ohio's in that kind of focus now. And you have people in the state government that want to bring that in here.
Music.
Classic
country music. I said, do you like classic country music, Steven?
Yeah.
Jerry Reed?
Yeah.
His song, She Got the Gold Mine and I Got the Shaft. That's pretty much what the situation is here with data centers in the state of Ohio. They get the gold mine and the people of Ohio get the shaft.
Yeah.
So, oh man, I'm riled up, Jay. I'm riled up on this data center issue. Steven,
the conversation comes up. The conversation comes up that so they'll have jobs, and some of them are conservative estimates of 25 to 50
jobs. Okay.
And I don't think, obviously, I would like more jobs for the people living around here. They say, okay, we're going to have 20 to 50 jobs. They're going to be high paying, good jobs. Awesome. That's great. One, I would, don't say Steven Wolfe, the expert on data centers, but I would imagine the people that they have come in working at these data centers, aren't random people they're picking up off the street in Marysville or Jerome and saying, hey, we want you to come help work and be an engineer at our data center. It's people that they have that understand this is what they have to do. We're bringing them in from other places, and they come in here and work.
I got to get another shot in here. But it's true. It's true. I'm a genuine America First conservative, and you got somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy that's sitting here saying that Americans can't do jobs, and we got to bring in all these Indians and Chinese H-1B visas. They're going to be filling all these data centers if that man gets his way.
Well, I believe even from like Chicago, bringing there's different. And not specifically Chicago itself, but not data centers even, but there's different groups that have come in that, different companies, hey, we're building here, we want to do this, and we're going to have these jobs, but then they bring in people from other parts of the United States that they already have trained and they already have, the knowledge and what they want them to do. So they're bringing in people that, aren't in that local area. They're not here in Marysville. They're not in Union County. They have the knowledge that they need them to have on whatever they're doing. So they have jobs, but it's jobs for people from other places to relocate them here. And you're not employing, people from the community. And obviously there's a mix of that in different places. And but I use examples like Honda and Scott's and Nestle here in Marysville. People from around this area, from especially Honda, especially Marysville, Logan County, kind of Hardin County, even into Columbus. Those are the people coming to work there. Scott, similar way. People in Marysville are working there. I don't think that's going to be the case with these data centers. Maybe a handful, but for the most part, most of the people they have working at these are going to be from other parts of the United States, other countries, whatever it is, and it's not going to be a benefit for workers in our community.
Not America first, not Ohio first, not in the slightest. Now we talked, a little bit there about special interests, big money in politics, buying off these politicians. Are you concerned by the amount of money that a particular member in this race in the 86th district, Mr. Ben Weber, has been receiving? I mean, being maxed out during that pre-primary contributions from like ACT Ohio, which are very much connected with the data centers, and IBS Energy and all these other unions and PACs and special interests. As much ACT Ohio gave as much to him as Vivek, and he's fresh out of law school, never worked a real job in his life. What's going on? I mean, does that concern you? And I'm not trying to bait you into attacking one of your opponents. It's a legitimate question that people need to know, just like you were saying earlier about getting experience in the state house and seeing things that go on that make you say, is that right? And people need to track the money. They need to look into the endorsements. So does this concern you, Steven? Because as far as I'm aware, you are pretty well, you haven't taken any of that dirty money, right?
The money that is running and funding my campaign is from people here in Union County, people that I have conversations with, people I've known for years, residents, members of the church I go to. I've had, Tom Young, my former boss, gave me a little money, $1,000, and Phil Plummer gave another $1,000. But other than that, the money's coming in from Union County. It's coming in from the people that I've known and have those conversations with. And that's the focus of my campaign, is the people. It's, the residents of Marion, the residents of Marysville, Richwood, wherever you are in the district, and I had a good conversation today in Richwood with a gentleman who, brought up that exact thing. You get a lot of candidates running for office. And I see it at the state level. And I think a lot of the reason for that, the large influence of lobbying and special interest in these elections and the amount of money that they're giving to candidates, is because they're around, they're there forever. And, you don't have to stop being a lobbyist after 8 years. And you have new people that come into office. And so they want to get, as much influence over them as they can, and say, hey, here's our max donation. Here's $10,000 there that we're willing to support you if you back our cause. And I've always said lobbying gets a bad name. Lobbyists get a bad name. Special interests, those groups, they get bad names. For some, there's different smaller groups, smaller, communities that need someone to go lobby for them because they're not able to reach out and have conversations, and that makes sense. But you get a lot of these PACs, a lot of groups that you don't know where the money's coming from, and they can give that max donation, and then they have that influence over someone. That's not the case in my campaign. It's like I said, I'm focused on, this is my home, the community I live in, the people that live here are family, friends, people that have, like I said, family all over the district up into Marion, and that's who I'm worried about. If someone wants to go ahead and endorse the Wolf for Ohio campaign, awesome. But I'm not, you're not going to control my campaign and who I am and what I believe. And I'm going to tell you what I believe, and that's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to change my mind or say something I think is going to, get me a vote, or, work and try and get the endorsement of someone that I think will benefit me to get me a vote. I'm going to say these are my principles. These are my ideals. When I talk with residents, I tell it how it is. I don't sugarcoat it. This is who I am. Here are my beliefs, and this is what I stick to. It's not a hey, I'm working to get as much money as I can from different political action committees and different groups, and going through the process. And each candidate gets sent out different surveys, and you fill them out and say, hey, here's where I am, and sometimes you get those endorsements, sometimes you don't. But I'm not out there to represent any political action committee. If I happen to agree with the different group on different things just because that's where my ideals are, awesome. But I'm not indebted to anybody to make any decision. It's about the people of this district. That's what I care about the most. Having lived here and having family all over, that's what matters to me, is the people that are voting, the voters. I had a good conversation with a woman. She lives in a trailer park here in Marysville, and brought up, hey, I appreciate you coming by, knocking on my door and talking with me. We don't get, many candidates, many politicians that want to come by and, hear our voice, hear what we're saying, hear what we think about things. And that it disappointed me a lot, because to me, every vote matters, from the person living in a $2 million house to the person living in a $10,000 house, and everywhere in between a renter and, someone that owns a business and someone that shops at that business. Those votes all matter. And not, I'm not playing favorites. I'm not, out here to, represent one group or one, sector or one industry. I'm here for the people of Marysville and what I think is best for them, and the people of Marion, and the different challenges that come with each community, because every area of this county is different. It would, you go from Jerome up to Marion and down to Richwood and over to Magnetic Springs and all over, and they're all different. It's a different community that, that's where I'm focused. That's what I care about the most.
And that's how it should be. And I respect those statements 100%. But I am going to ask you again, why you mentioned the PACs and the special interest money, and that you won't be controlled. That's the key word, Stephen, is control. This money comes with strings attached. It's not just freely given and saying, hey, you know what? We like your style. Here you go. We have no expectations of you for anything.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not how it works. You know that. It's about control. So why do you think that Ben Weber is receiving all this money from these special interests above any other politician? What is going on? Do they see him as the prodigal son, like the next iteration of, I don't know, George Washington, or you name the greatest American politician or leader in the history of mankind? Is that what's going on here? Or do they see Union County, do they see Marion County, Central Ohio, as a strategic place for investment? And what are they looking to do? Well, we know the vision is a data center everywhere. We know that these corporate interests, what their plans are for the state of Ohio. So what are your thoughts? Why is he getting all that money from these special interests?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to why. Could only assume that they agree on different things and agree with different conversations.
You don't think it's about control?
I like I said, I'm not going to speak to why someone gives someone else money. My focus is me and my campaign.
You said, I'm not. No, Stephen. No, I'm not trying to be a butthead here. This is a huge issue.
I understand, and like I said, I can't speak for them.
It was, and you admitted that it was about control when they come to you. These PACs come to you, so they're trying to control him, and not just him, other politicians too. But we're talking about the 86th district, and I think it's a clear distinction to say that you have not taken that money that we're aware of, right? And you said you haven't. It's been all local from the 86th district, not from the PACs and stuff. And I'm just saying that that's a big deal. That's it. And I'm not trying to
No, I
start
completely
scraps.
understand. I would say, it's agreement on different policies. If you agree with someone, more likely than not, you're probably going to give them money on depending on what they believe on, be it data centers or be it different political issues, abortion or, gun rights or whatever it might be. So you're going to give someone in these groups, they operate the same way. They obviously have an agenda. They have things that they support and don't support, and they have, different arguments on either side that they support or don't support. So I can only imagine that they agree on how Ben has, thought about different things. I'm obviously not in the room on those conversations. So I can only imagine they agree with him on different policy agenda items that he has and things he supports or doesn't support.
They agree on servitude and puppeteering. That's what it comes down to. But I won't beat a dead horse. I get what you're saying, and I know you don't want to be accused of slinging mud and everything. It's fine. It's fine. And like I said, I'm not trying to cause problems, but it just, for a grassroots conservative, again, people are sick of this. They're
Mm-hmm.
sick of, during campaigns, every politician out there is saying, I'm the most conservative grassroots person in existence. Look at my endorsement from this group, this group, this group. Meanwhile, then when they get in office, they take all this money. They've already taken it during the campaign and nobody talks about it. And then they do the bidding of that special interest or the speaker who's even getting paid off even more. And that's just the way it works. And then nothing happens. And you get all these bills that go nowhere that are actually conservative in essence. And then I don't know. That's just how it is. And it's very frustrating. But all right, we've rattled off a number of topics just that are hot button issues here as we've progressed here. Got Steven's campaign site up here, folks. Jay's got that up on the screen. And again, we're talking with Steven Wolfe, who is running in the Republican primary, which will be held on May 5th for the state representative of the 86th district. So we've talked about the data centers. You could throw in, I'm sure, solar farms, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these large scale solar farms. Do you have a similar position on those as you do with data centers, or do you want to articulate a difference?
Yeah, it's very similar to that position on data centers. It's having family that lives around a lot of these solar farms, and the negative experiences you have there. Obviously, I'm a strong person that is in favor of property rights that people have, but I think at the very least, if there's going to be these solar farms in the area, and as they're continuing to grow, there needs to be a benefit for the residents of the surrounding communities, and helping out with electricity and providing all of that from sitting there out there in the fields and using up the farmland. But I'm not not a huge fan of solar farms.
All right, let's just keep going here. We're doing good. Quick and to the point. Now you've kind of distinguished yourself a little bit from your opponent Wesleyan Davis at the candidates night that we had in Marion 2 weeks ago on the topic of property taxes and the citizen initiative to eliminate property taxes by constitutional amendment. So do you want to articulate the reason why you are opposed to that citizen-driven initiative to eliminate property taxes, and explain your position on that? Because it's pretty popular out there, Stephen. Maybe not amongst all these public sector employees and these government parasites, but amongst the grassroots people, it's pretty popular. It may need to be tweaked. There may need to be things, but spending has to be cut. You can't keep expanding the size of government. That's the other thing that frustrates the hell out of me and people like me, is that Ohio is a red state. It's got all these alleged conservatives in office, and yet they grow the size of government exponentially. Spend. What are your thoughts?
So in regards to property tax, like I've said, when I'm going door to door and meeting with residents, and like I said at the candidates forum, I understand completely the desire to remove property tax. It's the lack of movement and the lack of reform and the inability of the government to get things done leads to that. But my concern comes in where we have property tax as the main source, and a wise man said that Ohio's addicted to property tax and needs to go to rehab, and I completely agree. Between school districts, townships, the police and fire departments within those townships, board of developmental disabilities, health departments, you name it, these local governments are entirely, for the most part, 70 to 80% of their budgets are reliant upon property tax. So I think if we go ahead and say property taxes are gone, we can't just do it overnight. It can't be a thing that, it's gone right away after that passes, becomes a constitutional amendment, and, obviously goes into effect. If it were to ever happen that property taxes are done away with, it has to be something that is walked out, done over time, and we have the necessary, funding mechanisms in place. So my focus, rather than just entirely getting rid of property tax, has been making reform that's meaningful, that is actually having the effect that we want, and is making people's lives better. When I'm going door to door, I hear a lot of people, and a majority of the people that I spoke to, and everyone has their, here's our walking list of where we're going, whose doors we're knocking on, where you're mailing stuff to. But a majority of the people that I'm talking to and that I've heard from have concerns with entirely just getting rid of property tax. It has to be something that's well thought out, and we have to be responsible about it. So my focus is, rather than staying in the current system we're at, where it's, hey, you have your house, your neighbor sells theirs, that's going to affect your property taxes, because living in different areas, Marysville is a good example. It's growing. There's a lot of people moving here. Prices are going up. Homes aren't getting any cheaper. So the person across the street sells their home for $400,000. Well, if you haven't sold your home, you haven't moved out of your house, you've lived there for the last 30 years, you've been a part of the community, your kids have gone through the high school, you go up to the different events uptown, you're ingrained in the community. You're getting negatively affected because the people around you are selling their homes and moving somewhere else, or living somewhere else, or downsizing and living in the community. It frustrates me when I see, residents of my ward, elderly residents that are considering that they have to sell their home because they can't afford property tax payments because of situations like that, where the price keeps going up and up and up. And sure, in the current system, could prices fall, and everyone's homes now you only have to pay, it's worth $250,000 instead of $400,000. Sure, but that's not going to happen, and it's not going to be something that happens immediately. So looking at it as this is what you purchase your price. This is the purchase price of your home, basing the property tax value on that. So it's not continually increasing and increasing and increasing. There's different kind of ideas within different states, but some are every 3 years, every couple of years, it's a 1% increase, or it's it's based on just solely what you buy your house at. Other states, it's we have a small increase depending on what inflation is, or whatever a lower percentage is, and taking that into account, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback on just that idea in and of itself. And people say that makes sense. I'm buying my house for, there's homes here, and it's hard for younger people to, get started and start a family in today's world in Central Ohio, and home prices aren't going down. So looking at, hey, this is what, you buy your first house there at $200,000. Awesome. That's what you're paying your property taxes on. You can count on, okay, this is what I got to pay each year. It's not something that's just continually going up. You can budget it. It makes sense. I look at it like a stock. You buy stock in Google. You're not paying, taxes on that just because you own it. It's not continually going up, and you pay it once you sell it. And property tax is a different situation, but it's in the similar light. You buy your home, you shouldn't be punished because people around you are selling their homes. So making sure that we're being responsible and not taking away 70% of a school district's funding or 70% of a township's funding. Because, I look at Paris Township here in Union County. The city of Marysville is entirely within Paris Township, give or take, a couple little areas. And then you have kind of the outlying areas of Paris Township that are in the county, and they're getting property tax funding. That's where their money's coming from. So we've worked with them to have a conversation on, let's make sure that the money and the stuff you're spending this money on is benefiting also the residents of Paris Township or city of Marysville, and not just the outlying areas. So we've come to an agreement. We're going to work within our city to do that. So that focus gets put back into Marysville. But then you have Marysville Schools is a good example. Because of the rising home prices, people have concerns with the levies that they have to ask for. And 70, 65, 70, 80% of the school's budget comes from property tax. 2/3 of what it costs to fund the school system here is on the back of the taxpayer. So I think another part of this property tax that I'm focused on is, if we're going to do this, let's fully implement the fair school funding formula, update numbers from 2021 to 2025, 26, make sure that the state is paying what it's supposed to be paying, so these school districts aren't relying on property tax owners as much. And then you have so we tie in, okay, it's a purchase price based property tax system. It's not something that changes every 3 years and it's kind of at random depending on what levy passes or what doesn't. And then you have the state taking in and saying, hey, we're going to fully fund this formula. We're going to make sure that the school districts have what they need so they're not so reliant on local taxpayers. But then also, I want to make sure that our most vulnerable are protected from this. So I look at seniors on fixed income, our disabled veterans, making sure that we're exempting them from property tax. Because I'm sure you guys agree, and people shouldn't rent from the government for life. They shouldn't be reliant upon, oh my gosh, I can't pay this property tax, I'm going to lose my house. It has to be something where those seniors are totally exempt from paying property tax, or disabled veterans totally exempt from paying property tax. And that comes into what you mentioned earlier, the amount of money that we spend as a state. It's astronomical. It's crazy to me. It continues to grow. Government doesn't shrink. If it grows, it's going to stay that size or get bigger. So making sure that we're being responsible with taxpayer dollars at the state level, taking that money, but then bringing it back to the local taxpayer. So we cut back on programs that don't need to be funded. We make sure that if there's different agencies that have similar programs and we can streamline that process to get better results for our residents, let's do that. Let's find areas where there's different projects and different people that come in and say, hey, we want to spend money. Hey, can we get $1 million for this project in the state budget? We don't need to be, there's different things that the state does need to be involved in, and making sure that we're cutting back spending and taking spending from a lot of these large growing state agencies, making sure that they're trimmed down to size and they're effective, they're lean. I look at the city of Marysville. We run a pretty lean staff for a city of 30,000 people. And there's problems in any form of government, but for the most part, the city of Marysville has operated lean. They're responsible with what we do with our funding, but we're also making sure that we're getting results for people and answering questions. We're, reaching out and getting a solution made. Whereas you get to the state government, some things get so big there that it's just, it's a rounding error in a lot of these cases. And, it's $500,000 here or $2 million there, or whatever it is. But trimming back what we're spending allows us, one, to go through with this funding formula. It allows us, two, to make sure we're phasing out, making sure the homestead exemption fully exempts our seniors, and they're not worried about losing their home. And people have lived in their home for 40, 50, 60 years. They've got their home, their families live there forever. Making sure we're being responsible and supporting our communities in that way. And like I said earlier, if we are going to get rid of property tax at some point, making sure that it's a process that's well thought out, that's responsible, that doesn't make us rely upon the state for any more money, because I don't want us to get to a point where, the state of Ohio is fully funding every single public school, is giving all this money to townships, is giving all this money to the health departments and Board of Developmental Disabilities. I am a big proponent of local control, and I think every community is different, but the people that are on the ground in those communities know what's best for what needs to happen in those areas. And a lot of times you get larger and larger you get in government, the higher up you go, there's so much more removed. They're not able to have those conversations with people. They think they know everything, but they really don't. They're not on the ground day to day. They're not having conversations with people. It's a frustrating part of, just the way that our country is kind of set up, where the more and more you lose control at the local level, the less and less likely you're ever to get that back. There's different projects, different decisions that get made that, the school board, city council, township trustees get less and less say over, hey, we think this is good for our community. The people that, city council, township trustee, those are the smallest forms of government that have the most direct ability to have a communication point with your residents. You see them at the grocery store, you're going to, wherever you're at, eating with them, your kids go to school with them. It's that point of making sure that the people that are in local office have the most say on what's going on in the daily lives of those communities, and bringing back, one, cutting the size of government, but also bringing that decision-making and authority back down from the state level to the people in the local offices.
In theory, you would think that would make a difference as far as having local control, but in reality, a lot of times it doesn't, because you're involved in public sector unions, and then you get elected politicians that are beholden to them, and it doesn't matter. They're just going to vote to do whatever they want on that to help out their buddies in the unions. But it's two words: cut spending.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another frustration for an actual conservative, which I think I'm like pretty much a dodo, because I don't think that there are any fiscal conservatives anymore, like anywhere. And it's infuriating. I'm going to be tearing my hair out here. I'm going to look like Robert Landon before this show is over. And, conservatives, man, like, you studied poli-sci, you studied history. Like, we're supposed to believe in small government. We should be not talking about tax reform and cuts to government by talking about, cuts with a little scalpel. I mean, take this little part here and just be really careful. I don't want to cut too close to this because I might hurt him. No, give me a freaking hatchet and I'll cut the freaking thing off.
You might find this funny. Back in college, I got made fun of, and one of my teammates referred to me continually as fiscal, because I'm fiscally conservative. He was very liberal. We would go back and forth on different things. But you're exactly right. We got to be willing to go in there, cut spending, because it only grows. Things get more expensive, and we only continue to spend more and more each year. So making sure that we're bringing that money back. I've had conversations with different elected officials, and it frustrated me when I heard this. But they said, "Well, this is our township's money, or this is the city's money, or this is whatever's money." And I had to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. This is the citizens' money. This is the taxpayers' money. If they're forced to pay this. They can't just say, no, I don't want to pay my income tax or my property tax, or I don't want to pay sales tax on this. They have to pay it. So it's their money. They're not voluntarily giving this to, the state of Ohio. I'm sure there's some people, crazy people, that say, hey, I paid this. Here's more. You can have more of my money. But 99% of people aren't paying, just giving money to the government. They're forced to give that money, and we have to be responsible with every single penny that we spend. And I've different times on, in the two budgets we've gone through here on city council, I've said, try to find ways to be responsible. There's great programs that we do as a city. There's great programs at the state level. there's needed things. Obviously, like for us in the city of Marysville, the focus is police and fire. Public safety is number one for us. We have a large police department, fires department, in a growing city. That's very important. But then we also have to look at what else are we spending our money on? Where else can we tie things in? Because we operate on a 1.5% income tax, which is this is smallest in this close to Central Ohio area. When you compare places like Dublin and Delaware and Hilliard and Worthington and all that. So we're operating on a lean budget and we're being responsible in that regard. But even then, there's still stuff we can cut back on. That is it a nice program that we have? Is it a nice thing that we're spending money on here? Sure. Is it necessarily needed? Maybe not. But you have that at all levels. You have it at the township levels and in the school districts. There's different things that are awesome and necessary. Yes. Are there things that to benefit the students? Yes. Are there things that are needs? Obviously. Are there things that are wants that we have that we're able to fund? Yes. So you have to be able to make sure that we're tightening our budgets all around, because in different places, the state of Ohio financially has been doing well. The city of Marysville has been doing well, but that's not always going to be the case. And you have to be responsible. You can't just spend the money because we have it. We have to make sure that where we don't need to be spending, don't spend there. Where we can cut back on, obviously, is if it becomes the past and the income tax is fully phased out once Vivek becomes governor, and we work through that process. Awesome. But we can't just say, hey, we're going to have to get our money from somewhere else and institute a new tax or raise taxes somewhere else to get back that funding, because we have to cut spending. People are cutting spending every day. Their wallets and their family checkbooks, they're going through and saying, where can we not spend money? Where can we cut back? Is it this subscription service? Is it Netflix? Is it the whatever? I'm not saying that every single dollar that's spent is terrible, but we have to face reality, and we have to look at the people that is being forced to spend that or give that money and say, hey, we got to cut back. We can't keep doing what we've been doing. It's not working. It doesn't work for the people, and it's not fiscally responsible.
Rules for thee, not for me. That's government, man. They can get what they want. They don't have to be accountable. Now, pop quiz for you here, Steven. Yeah. Top 3 employers in the city of Marion.
So Whirlpool is up there.
Whirlpool is not. I'm saying in the city of Marion. The city? Population 35,000.
Let's go with the school district.
That's one of them.
Prison?
No, that's not in the city of Marion. But I'll just tell you the other one. So 2 out of the 3 are public sector.
Yeah.
So Marion City Schools and the city of Marion, and then also the hospital.
Okay. Yeah.
But that if that was a food pyramid, folks, your ass would be grass. Because you're eating all the shit. That's that biggest part of your diet is parasitic, just stuff that's going to kill you.
Yeah.
And that's the economy for the city of Marion and a lot of these other cities across this state and across this country since the implementation of the welfare state. That's what I'm saying, man. We got to be going to war against big government. But you get all the special interests that have all the money that buy off the politicians to perpetuate their power and influence. So then you get nothing done with that. You see where I'm going to go Robert Landon here and tear my hair out? Do you?
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Jay sees it. You know when Marion's heyday was, man, just historically speaking? What would you say as far as, give me a 20-year range, as far as the wealthiest, most prosperous, lowest unemployment, most businesses?
Before the turn of the century, it'd be probably the 70s, 80s.
A little bit earlier than that, buddy. About 1900 to 1930 would have been your prime. But you look at the tax policies. So you talked about Marysville having a 1.5%. That's huge when you're talking Marion has 2%.
Mm-hmm.
So why the hell would you come to Marion in the city when you can get a hell of a lot lower municipal income tax rate in the city of Marysville?
Yeah.
And this stuff, it matters. It matters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all because of the growth of government.
Yeah.
The growth of government. When you look at when the city of Marion implemented its income tax in 1959, what did they do? It was supposed to be temporary. Oh, we just need this for this infrastructure project, and we swear it'll go away after 2 years. And it didn't. And we swear we use it on infrastructure, but they didn't. They used it to hire people.
Mm-hmm.
Hire. And you got all these public sector unions that are like, yes, help us out, elected politicians. See where it is, man? It's a mess. It's a mess.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't end up in fundamental change, you want to talk about one quote from Barack Hussein Obama, that if we had a genuine conservative go out there and say, we are going to fundamentally change this country. He said that, but he meant it for the communists. We need somebody on our side to say, we're going to fundamentally change this country. So, Steven Wolfe, are you going to be the conservative champion? Are you going to fundamentally change the 86th district? That is our last question for the night.
I'm going to do my darndest. I'm going to make sure that there is change here within our community. It's a conversation I had today, a lot of focus in the growth or development or positive things that have happened in this district. Tend to focus on the southern part of Union County, Marysville, Jerome Township. I want to make sure that the prosperity is shared throughout the entire district, through Richwood, through Marion, Magnetic Springs, wherever it is. I'm going to make sure that if I do get elected and become state representative here, that I'm a voice for all the people throughout this district, small city, large city, rural, wherever it is. I'm going to make sure that we're making change that benefits everyone.
Okay, just a quick follow-up on that, because there again, politicians promise everything during the campaign cycle, and then when they get in office, they're like, Marion, what? What's this thing up here on the map that's north of Union County? That's what we're stuck with right now. We've got what has Tracy Richardson done? I'm sorry not to talk shit about people and stuff, but Marion's in dire straits at the county level, at the city level, with its city schools, across the board. Absolutely nothing going on economic development. Everybody is broke as a joke, and there's really nothing coming. Nobody's sitting here trying to really work anything out. And then when you look at what the city of Marion's doing, Stephen, have you been following that travesty as far as, we have $9 million, 14 funds in deficit, and we're in fiscal caution. And in 2026 budget, they give double-digit increases to salaries and benefits for every department. Can you explain that? I mean, nobody can explain that other than to say public sector unions, and they're one of the largest employers, number 3 in the city of Marion. They look out for each other.
Like I told you, I'm going to work for every citizen of the 86 House District. My focus isn't just on here in Marysville, down in Jerome. I have, I grew up going through Marion, playing baseball. My brother coaches soccer and had coached soccer up in Marion. My family lives in the area, lives in Marion. So I understand there's a lot more that needs to be done. There's a lot more focus that needs to be paid. I'm going to continue to advocate for what I advocate for. And, what I tell people, it's what I say is what I say. I stick to that. My word, you're only as good as your word. And, I don't make promises on, specific policies or this is exactly what I'm going to do. But I can guarantee to you that I care about Marion. I care about Northern Union County. I care about everywhere in this district. It's my home. It's where I'm going to raise my kids. It's where my family lives. So what's good for Marion is good for Marysville, is good for Jerome, is good for Richwood. We have to make sure that that prosperity is shared throughout the district. It can't just be focused in one spot.
Amen. All right. Well, there's just way too much to talk about. You know, we could go on and on. We could be burning the midnight oil. We could keep Steven up past his bedtime, and he's just going to not be able to function.
Oh yeah,
tomorrow.
we could sit here
And
for 5 hours straight and talk about financial issues and the crazy, and definitely.
yeah, there's just way too much. So maybe we'll get you on again, Steven.
Yeah.
I think it's been a good conversation. Sorry if I ranted a few times, but
you're
you know, it's justified. People need to get fired up about this stuff. Like you said, like I said earlier,
people got to be involved. They got to pay attention.
They don't care. They don't have a clue until they pick up their bill for this bill, or this is getting, you know, taken away from them or whatever. Like, until it bites them in the ass, they're clueless. Well, this is where you need to focus.
Right.
Focus locally. All politics are local. That's a quote from somebody a lot smarter than me or anybody on this show tonight. But it's true. It's 100% true. So get involved, pay attention, and how do people get in contact with you, Steven Michael Wolfe, candidate for the 86th District?
Yeah, you can reach out to me through email at wolfeforohio@gmail.com, WOLFEFOR Ohio@gmail.com. And then my website is also wolfeforohio.com. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. More than happy to talk. As you see here on the screen, you know, send in a, hey, here's something I want to talk about. Here's a concern I have. You know, we'll get that and get back to you as quick as we can. And, you know, like I said, that website, my email, best way to get in contact. And I'm more than happy to talk and have a good conversation.
Well, we're certainly glad that you joined us tonight here, Steven.
Yeah,
so we thank you so much. Check out his website. Send him messages. Ask him questions. This is a consequential race. Again, I think it's much more with the amount of money. Where there's smoke, there is fire, people. You've heard that quote before. And there is smoke in Central Ohio. There's money being spent. There's plans in the works. And you need somebody in there that's going to have your interest, or at least will listen to you.
Right.
So do your homework and make the right decision. So check them out. Check out all candidates and make your decision. But it's big deal. And that's how you should treat every election, because it really isn't small elections. There may be small people, but there's not small elections. So anyway, we went on here. So I appreciate Steven Wolfe for joining us. Jason Foreman, as always, for manning the boards. And I'm Cody Higley, and this has been the Watchman's Report. And remember, folks, a watchman is always vigilant. Have a good night.
Have a good night, guys.
Sound the alarm! To arms!